With the back and forth on Iran, it is hard to tell where U.S. foreign policy is heading. And Senator Lindsey Graham was usually the one that helped us understand where the debates were going. His absence on Capitol Hill is huge right now. And joining me is the former prosecutor and, of course, host of Sunday Night in America and the Trey Gowdy podcast, and the author of great novels, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But he was one of the best friends of the late Senator Lindsey Graham. So, Trey Gowdy, thank you for being here.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
welcome back to Perino on Politics. This is, of course, where I call up all my smart friends and say, what is going on with the state of American politics? And this podcast is happening just a week after your very dear friend, Lindsey Graham, was laid to rest. And I thought we would just take a moment to reflect on your friendship and anything you wanted to say that you wanted our listeners to know.
Well, thank you, Dana. He was a metaphor for our state, is the way I look at him. Small, undersized, the most humble beginnings you could possibly imagine. And yet he was eulogized by presidents and world leaders. I mean, Lindsey Graham as a kid, he used to tell me he had the lowest SAT score ever recorded in the history of our state. And I never argued with him. I never said, no, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. It sounded about right. He probably did have the lowest SAT score ever recorded. But to be eulogized in the National Cathedral and have world leaders there, anything in this country is possible.
Yeah.
With wit, self-belief, determination. That's what I think about when I miss him. I miss the golf. I have reached for my phone so many times because he could make me laugh like no one else could make me laugh. He could also make me pull my hair out like no one else could make me pull my hair out. Moments like this, foreign policy, that's what he lived for.
Mm-hmm. He was able to, I guess, bridge divides. There's a lot of partisanship in politics. There's a lot on Capitol Hill. But as President Trump said, whenever he needed a Democrat to get something over the finish line, Lindsey Graham could provide that. What was the special skill that he had that gave him that ability?
I think growing up running a pool hall, you're around everyone. And some of your customers may believe one thing. I mean, the federal judge that I worked for in the same part of the world that Lindsey came from told me that I needed to spend more time in bars. He said, I know you don't drink, but you have got to learn how people think. Lindsey was listening to him talk to the boys that drove the golf carts was no different from listening to him talk to the owner of the golf course. He just had this, he didn't carry a grudge. He was awful at that. He could not remember who he was mad at. So, yes.
But is that a skill? I mean, that sounds like a great skill. What a coping mechanism.
I don't have it. I tell my wife my favorite Bible verse is vengeance is mine. And she says that's not the verse. The verse says, saith the Lord. You're leaving off the most important part. I say, well, you look at it the way you want to look at it. I like vengeance is mine. He just, I mean, we literally met because he endorsed my opponent when I ran for Congress. That was how we met one another.
I didn't know that.
Yes. And he was the first phone call afterwards and said, you beat me, I will be the best friend that you have in Washington. And I would doggone if he didn't turn out to be so helpful to me and Tim and Mick when we got there.
Wow. Well, we are all going to feel the loss, especially as we look at the situation with Congress. There's 1 week left for the Senate, and they got a lot on their plates. They're going to go on recess for 5 weeks, which I think a lot of people think, oh, that means they go on 5-week vacation. That's not the case. There's a midterm. They have a lot to do back home. But also, I kind of like it when Congress isn't in town because that means they can't pass any bad laws. But there's some good laws that do need to get done. One would be the defense budget. And we don't even have the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And that's been about two months now. And we're about to have the 25th anniversary of 9/11. And anniversaries mean something to us. And sometimes they don't mean that much to our adversaries. But we will be on heightened alert and blind when it comes to that intelligence. So I wonder what you think Lindsey Graham would have us do to try to make this Congress work better.
Well, I think specifically on FISA, what he would do is he would have John Ratcliffe, who is one of the most highly respected, well-regarded He had 100% conservative rating, so he's hardly a globalist.
And
rhino.
just for our listeners that don't know, you're speaking of the current CIA director.
And a former terrorism prosecutor who understands FISA upside and down, and so did former Senate Intel Chairman Marco Rubio. I think they're the two best communicators that are in this current administration, and I would have them front and center. I know Johnny doesn't like doing television. Marco doesn't do, he does a little bit.
Yeah.
Though they're the two best at explaining what happened to President Trump and the abuse. The example I would give you, Dana, is, police officers make bad searches all the time. They make bad arrests. We don't do away with search warrants and arrest warrants. We do away with those bad cops. You don't do away with a program because somebody abused it. You do away with the people who did not live up to our trust. I would have Radcliffe in front of the members of the House and Senate and say, these are the terrorist plots that we foiled because of FISA. Now, if you want to go explain to your constituents why we didn't reauthorize this and why a certain number of casualties is okay, have at it.
Right. It is a mystery, and I really truly hope that gets done and quickly. The other thing that happened, the acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, who's trying to get fully Senate confirmed, has just said he will make sure that there's no anti-weaponization fund and the IRS thing that the President Trump had initially said he wanted. He said that's off the table, and therefore Senators Tillis and Cornyn, who had been the holdouts on Blanche's confirmation out of the Judiciary Committee, they are going to push him forward. So I think that Todd Blanche will become Senate confirmed before the end of the week. What about you?
I do, and I hope so for a lot of reasons. I think that he would be really good, and what comes after him, God only knows. I will say this on behalf of Senator Cornyn. He's been a friend for a long time. I was surprised that 99.3 was not a good enough rating to win the president's endorsement.
Yeah.
A lesser man would say, I'm not going to cooperate at all. You didn't help me. I'm not going to. That's not been his approach. He just said, do away with this fund. And Tillis, same way. He's not coming back because the president did not endorse him. And they could have picked up their ball and gone home and said, you know what? Not going to be cooperative. I think they like Todd. They're not blaming Todd because of their frustration with someone else.
And actually, I heard that they were the vocal opposition to this anti-weaponization fund, but there were other senators who quietly agreed with them.
About 14 of them on the Republican side, at least.
So that's how that works. The big story that I'm really following is the Democrats in disarray, the internal fight between the so-called Democratic establishment or the moderate Democrats, which actually the only really difference between, I don't think they're that moderate. They're quite progressive in my opinion, but the Democratic Socialists of America, they are on the march. But there's kind of some weird things happening. So in Wisconsin, you have Francesca Hong, who was one of my guests last Friday on America's Newsroom, and she is the likely winner of the Democratic primary in Wisconsin next week because her closest competitor dropped out because of a potential sex scandal. So now you have the DSA candidate that will go up against the Republican there in Wisconsin. The feedback I got was she's very nice. She was very sweet. She kind of spoke like a robot. And then you listen to Milat Kiros of Denver, who's also a DSA candidate. Same thing. And then Daraliza Chevalier, kind of the same thing. And then I think about Mamdani and El Sayed in Michigan, and that election against Haley Stevens on the Democrat side is happening tomorrow. And I'm starting to see a pattern, and I wonder if you see it too. This weird way of communicating where they never actually use full sentences to describe what it is that they really want to do.
Well, I think they're of a generation that didn't grow up writing or diagramming full sentences. They grew up in this limited character culture with X or social media, or you have to say it in 30 seconds. I think what they can't do is withstand cross-examination, which is what elucidates the truth the most. How can you possibly defend having no prisons. I mean, how could you? So my question would be, where do you want Dylann Roof to go? He killed 9 black Christian Americans because they were born black. If you don't believe in prisons, where would you like him to go? Or the Boston Marathon bomber? If you don't believe in the police, who are going to arrest child rapists? They talk like they have never been cross-examined before. And when you live in an echo chamber, which is what primaries are for the most part, good luck in a general election where you are going to get asked to defend some of these crazy positions.
But what should people say when, for example, I asked Francesca Hong about she has in the past said she wanted to abolish the police, abolish prisons, abolish the Supreme Court, and abolish the Senate. So when I asked her about abolishing the police, she said, well, I'm not for that anymore. I would be governor. Governors can't do that. And she said it's important for people to evolve. And I asked, who needs to evolve, the voters or have you evolved? And she didn't answer that question. But I wonder about how all of a sudden they say, oh, actually, I'm not for that. Or El Sayed will say, I'm not actually endorsed by the DSA, even though they're all campaigning for him.
Right.
How do you best advise those of us who are trying to prosecute the case? What's the best way to do that if someone says, well, I don't believe that anymore?
When did you realize you were wrong?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I used to ask people.
Okay.
I mean, they would apologize for something that they believed 3 years ago. It was wrong 3 years ago when you believed it. So what was your epiphany? I mean, sometimes people do evolve, and then sometimes they get what we call jail Jesus, which is I'm standing in front of a judge, I'm about to go to prison, I'm going to find religion all of a sudden. I'm just really suspicious of these kind of deathbed confessions where, yeah, of course I believe in the police because I can't get elected if I say I don't believe in the police. I can't answer who's going to arrest child rapists if we don't have police. Now, the ICE one, they can't back up on ICE, but think about it. Think about the millions of people that crossed the border over the past 4 years or before the border was secured. They don't want them removed. Do you know who was here? Do you know why they came? They can't answer those questions. So I'm always suspicious of these deathbed jail Jesus moments. I want to know when you realized you were wrong.
Okay, that's a good one for me to remember. I don't know if any of those candidates will listen to this podcast, so hopefully they won't be ready for that question. What would be the practical effect of expanding the Supreme Court? So Kamala Harris came out over the weekend, and all of a sudden now she is on the DSA bandwagon. She's not calling herself DSA, but she's adopting all of their policy positions quite strongly. She was even asked in Nashville at their meeting, name some great Democratic presidents, and she didn't even name the one who had put her on the ticket, Joe Biden. But now she is for expanding the Supreme Court, for example. And I wanted to ask you, just so people listening can understand, what is the practical effect of that if they want to go from 9 members to 13 members?
Well, right now, if you go to 13 members, the next 4 picks will be Republican Trump appointees. So if you want to do that, I would say go ahead and do it in a hurry. We've had 9 for a long time. Now, the number 9 does not appear in the Constitution. Actually, only 1 appears in the Constitution. It mentions the Chief Justice. It's by statute, and we've had 3 and 5 and 7, and then Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to pack the court, and that didn't go real well. I mean, the last thing you want, if you're like a tripartite Republican with a little r American, is to mess with the checks and balances. And what they want is a super legislature. They want the Supreme Court. I mean, they also want to do away with the Senate. They want the Supreme Court to get for them what they can't win at the ballot box. So think about it. If you can win these issues at the ballot box, why would you need the Supreme Court? So they want to change the role of the court, and then they want to dilute, what they perceive to be a 6-member conservative. But, Dana, you and I can sit here and think of 5 Supreme Court justices put on the bench by Republicans who surprised us with their moderateness. Mm-hmm. We cannot name a Democrat-appointed Supreme Court justice who surprised us with his or her conservatism. We get it right about half the time. They get it right all the time in terms of their ideology, and they're still not happy. They want more. Who preserved the so-called Affordable Care Act? It was John Roberts. Who is the one who ruled on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That was Neil Gorsuch. Who wrote the opinion on same-sex marriage? It was Anthony Kennedy. But they forget all of that. So, I mean, you want a court to not be what you can't get at the ballot box. And that's not the purpose of the Supreme Court.
It's really interesting. And I am kind of glad that they're giving us all this material because it provides for some deeper thinking and some choices to be made. And we have a big midterm coming up.
I think it is always not great when your best argument is they're worse than we are, but sometimes that is the only argument that you have is, and they're making that argument a lot better for us when they talk about crazy things.
Matthew Continetti in 2016, he was on a podcast that I was listening to, and he said, "Look, it's a race to the bottom, and we can win it." I usually ask, like, what are you paying attention to that I might not have on my radar? But today I want to spend this time talking about your side hustle, your passionate work as a novelist. 2 years ago, The Color of Death was a #1 New York Times bestseller. People loved it, loved the character, Colm Truesdale. And he is back next month, or this month, later this month, now that we are in August. And it's The Sound of Regret. What should people know as they should, well, obviously they should pre-order the book so that they get it right away and they can read it before Labor Day weekend. But what do you want them to know about this process and what have you learned about it?
Well, the first thing I want to do, because nobody reads the acknowledgments or the end, I want to save them the trouble. I mentioned somebody named Dana Perino who encouraged me to write fiction, and without her encouragement, I would never have written a fiction book.
Isn't it better to write it than to read Crime and Punishment over and over?
I like Crime and Punishment, but Dostoevsky's a little over my head. So this is so liberating. You don't get fact-checked. So The Color of Death was kind of looking at the criminal justice system and the relationship between cops and prosecutors, but really prosecutors and victims. The best prosecutors put themselves in the place of the victim, and that's really hard to do. It takes a toll on your soul. Mm-hmm. This one also originated in a case I actually prosecuted. It is the relationship between prosecutors and their witnesses. And oftentimes these witnesses themselves have been in trouble, but they're helping you out to help themselves out. But there is a bond there. And if you want to know what regret sounds like, go tell a mother that you convinced to trust you that her son was executed because he was a witness for you. People say, what, the sound of regret? What does regret sound like? It sounds like a prosecutor sitting in his office after he just had a witness killed for doing exactly what the prosecutor asked him to do, which was help. Mm-hmm. So if you've had a witness killed, that is what regret sounds like. This is that relationship between kids that grew up tough. They didn't have great choices. They made some mistakes. The system puts them in a position where you go to jail forever or you cooperate. Mm. And when you cooperate, there are risks involved. So it is raw. There's tension between the federal and state system, which I can tell you I was in both. So I like both, but there is tension. It's real and it is raw. And some of the characters are a continuation from the first book, mm-hmm. but it's also a standalone. If you didn't read The Color of Death, mm-hmm. you hadn't missed anything. Mm-hmm. You can pick this one up. Mm-hmm. If you did read The Color of Death and want to know where Belle is, or how Colm Truesdale's doing with his drinking. He's better, by the way. And she's in law school. And it was a joy to write. And we picked up a new dog in the process. Mr. District Attorney is our little cavapoo. And he and Justice sat in here with me.
In real life, too?
Yeah. Pardon me?
In real life as well?
Yeah, in real life. We got a little cavapoo and named him Mr. District Attorney, but you can call him DA.
I love that. One of the things that's interesting to me is how many people love to listen to true crime podcasts. I'm not one of them. I utilize podcasts to do information gathering for my work and sometimes for pleasure, like a couple comedy ones that some people don't think are so funny, like my husband. But the true crime podcasts are like through the roof. So I would say if people listening to this also like true crime, or you have someone in your family who likes true crime, Trey's books are so good because you can get inside the mind of the prosecutor. And that's some of my favorite passages is when you can tell, like it's direct from your experience. Obviously, it's a made-up story, but it's based on your lived experience. And I think that that's what makes you such a compelling novelist.
Well, thank you for that. The courtroom scenes were such a joy for me to write because the back and forth with the judges and the judges telling me, see me back in my chambers right now. And the whole way you're walking back there, you're wondering if you're going to lose your law license. All of that stuff is real, and I have lived it. I didn't lose my law license, but I got a tongue lashing. It is... look, I'm not smart enough to write about what I don't know. I do know the way the system works, and I know where the danger lies, and I know what excites people, and I want them to have a real look. Not what the miniseries and movies do, but this is the way it really works. Dana, if you sat in on a conversation between a prosecutor and a young man trying to decide whether or not to be a snitch, those are raw conversations. And the things that come out of both of their mouths, that little dialogue in the book happened every day that I was a drug prosecutor.
It's fascinating. And we have to give a little shout out to our editor, Sean Desmond. A lot of people, like my husband, doesn't really pay attention too much to like who wrote an article. But I always do just because of my training as a press person. And I also like to always see who the editor is. And Sean Desmond, in my opinion, is the best editor of his generation. He's really terrific and can do all sorts of different types of books, including ours.
He is amazing. He employs what I call tough love. And I like unfettered positivity.
Me too. Who doesn't?
but that's not what I need.
No,
what I need is tough love. What I like is my wife saying, oh, that's great. You're like Tolstoy or Chekhov. What I need is Sean Desmond.
But I get from Peter. Peter's very encouraging. But then he's like, there's just a couple of things. And because, I don't know, the Brits and their grammar are you sure it's this particular word? I'm like, that's when the scalpel gets out. And I love that. Well, everyone should pre-order The Sound of Regret and then get The Color of Death. If you haven't read that yet and you have time and you're at the beach, certainly get that one so that you can be prepared, even though The Sound of Regret is a standalone. We look forward to seeing you up in New York.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right.
And thank you
have a great week and have a great week,
done.
everyone. I'll see you next week.